the last of the speaker that we were waiting for, Advocate Themba Kanmugai-Tobi, has joined the conversation. I will hand over to the facilitator, Professor Akna Nanan. Please take us through, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, colleagues. It is indeed a great honor and privilege to be asked to facilitate this very important dialogue on the role of law in nation building. The juncture of this dialogue comes very importantly under COVID-19 conditions, which impresses upon us how crucial nation building is, not only in South Africa, but for humanity as a whole. It is my privilege and honor to call upon Father Smangalisho Makachwa, chairperson of the Moral Regeneration Movement, to briefly welcome us for about 10 minutes or so. Thank you. Father?
Yes, please. Give it to me, I'm getting my glasses.
Additional power. He needs additional power.
Thank you, colleagues. While Father is busy looking for his glasses, I think we will just lay a few ground rules there. So I will give all the speakers about 20 minutes in which to give their presentations. Please, colleagues, and even whoever is following us on Facebook, if you wish to raise questions, the questions can be put into the chat room. And we will address some of the questions after the speakers have conducted their talks. Questions will also be taken in rounds of 3. And the presenters will then have a chance to answer the questions. Okay, Father Smangaliso is with us. Are you with us, Father? Can you, yeah?
Thank you very much, Program Director, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I hope we have all washed our hands, sanitized places we regularly frequent, observe social distancing, and ensure that we observe hygiene. Thank you for that. Now we remember those who have succumbed to the coronavirus, including our frontline health workers, and we wish all those already infected a speedy recovery. Your co-hosts of today's seminar are the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities in partnership with the Moral Regeneration Movement. That is to provide a forum for the people of South Africa to boost the reflection, ongoing reflection on nation building or reconstruction. A very complex and open-ended enterprise indeed. We agree that July month was most appropriate for this exercise. It is a time during which the country and the world at large honor and celebrate Madiba's contribution to the world. July month is a time when the Moral Regeneration Movement highlights its special focus on the urgency of moral, ethical reconstruction of our nation. It is a recognition of Madiba's inspiration in the birth of the MRM. The CRL and MRM provide the foundational and ideational building blocks of our nation, its reconstruction and social cohesion. They share most of the values contained in the Charter of Positive Values. We therefore chose as our theme for today, the role of law in nation building. Madiba's own legal background and his appreciation of law must have prompted him to envision a free country that would uproot apartheid in its entirety. In his own words, in the interest of all our people, we will build national unity, drawing on the wealth of our human resources the courage and strength of our people. We want to build a nation free from hunger, disease, and poverty, free from ignorance, homelessness, and humiliation, a country in which there is peace, security, and jobs, unquote. The challenge facing us all, ladies and gentlemen, was how this ideal could be achieved in the face of daily murders, crime, gender-based violence, systemic corruption, materialism, breakdown of moral values, thieving with impunity, all alarming the alarming disregard for the law. Whilst we have very enlightened and progressive laws, lack of selective enforcement thereof appears to be our Achilles heel. Now, whilst the law cannot be a panacea for all our social ills, it is nonetheless central to the social order, peace, development, social cohesion, Ubuntu, prosperity of our very survival as a nation. Law is right in the center. Today's discussion, ladies and gentlemen, led by some of our best brains in the country, will kickstart an engagement which we hope to continue over the coming months. We may be in a crisis, yes, we are, but thanks to COVID-19, but it is not all gloom and doom and gloom. Milton Friedman made an interesting observation. He says, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that, in his own words, are lying around. We too, however modestly, we hope to contribute to the ideas that are lying around in order to shape the post-pandemic society. My colleague, Dr. Musoma, will comment further on the way forward. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. We look forward to a very, very lively and interesting engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father, for those very enlightening words. And to paraphrase some of your comments and Madiba's comments, words as well, is that the idea of this particular dialogue is essentially to find out how we can build a country of national unity, build an inclusive nation, one where there is peace, security, and employment for everyone. Just to set a few ground rules about the dialogue taking place today and for the way forward is that if you have any questions, please do raise them in the chat room on the screen. It is at the bottom menu there. Questions will be taken at the end of the presentations of the 4 speakers in rounds of 3. I do have a strict time limit for the presentations, so it is 20 minutes for each speaker. And the media will also get an opportunity at the end of the session in the Q&A session to ask their questions. It is now my privilege to invite Advocate Tembeka Mugaitobi to give his presentation. Let me briefly just read out his very illuminating CV. And Advocate Tembeka is a South African lawyer, public speaker, author, and political activist. He is a member of the South African Law Reform Commission. Mugaitobi has also authored the very important book called The Land is Ours, South Africa's First Black Lawyers and the Birth of Constitutionalism. He holds degrees of BProc, LLB at UNITRA, LLM at Rhodes University, and another LLM at the London School of Economics. He is currently also working with an international legal team that is representing the major opposition political party in Zimbabwe after the deadly elections that took place. In 2019, he became a senior counsel after practicing law as an advocate for nearly 8 years. an enormous achievement in the light of the status typically obtained by very older advocates given the 10 to 15 years minimum requirement for that particular prestigious appointment. So it is our great pleasure to invite and ask Advocate Tembeka to address the gathering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the generous introduction. I think it was written in 2018 when,
Okay.
when the Zimbabwean case was still going on. For those who want to know, we were subsequently kicked out of Zimbabwe by the current president. Nevertheless, what I want to talk about are basically two themes. The first is just to situate Mandela as a lawyer, Nelson Mandela as a lawyer, and then to look at his contribution as president in relation to notions of the rule of law and notions of justice, but not neutral justice, but transformative justice. So to recap on the history, we encounter Mandela as a student at the University of Fort Hare in the early 40s. And he leaves the University of Fort Hare not so much as a highly politicized student, but nevertheless, as someone who is already attracted to the ANC, to the ideas of the ANC Youth League and the ANC in general, the Youth League itself being launched a couple of years after. And so he is already politicized, but his political views have yet to mature when he leaves the University of Fort Hare. It is really in Johannesburg that Mandela matures as a political activist. At Fort Hare, he had studied for a BA degree. One of the lecturers at Fort Hare was Professor Z.K. Matthews. And Z.K. Matthews himself, was a foremost intellectual in his era, having studied, among others, at Yale University, as well as the London School of Economics, and at Fort Hare teaching native administration, as well as anthropology. In Johannesburg, Mandela enters the University of Wits in 1943. And at that point, he had completed his BA degree, no longer via Fort Hare, but via UNISA. And he enters the University of Wits as one of the very few, I think, in fact, in his LLB class, he may have been the only Black student in 1943. His academic record is not much to write home about. In 1943, he failed all of the 4 modules. In 1944, he passed 4 modules out of 5. In 1946, he passed 3 out of 5. In 1947, he failed the entire module. And the university excluded him from the LLB class. He protested against his exclusion, but nevertheless, from 1947, he had been excluded from Wits University and his LLB class. Mandela would finish his LLB degree only in 1988 at UNISA and no longer at Wits. But by 1952, Mandela joined a law firm to do articles of clerkship. Now, at that stage, for those who are interested, you could still do an articles of clerkship without having completed the LLB degree, unlike the situation now where you cannot enter into a program of articles without having completed the LLB degree. But in the 50s, the system was that you could. So he entered his articles of clerkship with his BA degree because his LLB degree was only completed a couple of months before his release from prison at Victor Verster. He worked with an attorney called Lazar Sidelsky, who was not a political lawyer as such, but he did wills, property, magistrates court, a little bit of criminal law. He didn't stay long at Sidelsky, and he worked for another firm called Teblanche and Briggish. He didn't stay long in that firm either. He stayed for approximately 1 year, but he would finish his articles at a firm called Hellman and Mischer, where he stayed for a couple of months. But during his period of articles, Mandela had struck a relationship with Oliver Tambo. Oliver Tambo himself was doing articles of clerkship. But in one of the various lunches that they had together, they had agreed that they should establish a law firm together. So the law firm was subsequently established. It was called Mandela and Tambo. They encountered problems with the Group Areas Act, with the government feeling that they are running a practice in an area not assigned for native settlement, and which they had to resist. It's crucial to note the influences of young Mandela as a lawyer. Obviously, the main influence would have come from his mentors, Sidelsky. Sidelsky's belief was that law should not encroach upon politics at all. He believed in a strict separation of law and politics. But another lawyer who trained Mandela was Basner. Basner was a member of the Communist Party. He thought that the separation of law from politics was a fiction. In fact, Basner ran for election in 1936 to represent so-called natives of the Cape. So Mandela, at the beginning, had these conflicting influences about the role of law in society. Should law play a role in politics? Should law be separated from politics? His own experiences when he began practicing law with Oliver Tambo would largely inform him that the idea that law could be separated from politics was indeed a fictional idea. Now, Oliver Tambo explains what they were faced with. And here is a quote from Oliver Tambo's biography, explaining how they encountered the law. This is what he says. As technically proficient as white attorneys might be, Black clients were severely hampered in communicating with their difficulties to them. Language was a barrier, even when good translators were at hand. White lawyers' lack of familiarity with African culture, tradition, and values impeded communication, and therefore the cause of justice. Removing these obstacles by providing Black legal representation might give Black people an outside chance in law courts. So from the very beginning, Oliver Tambo's conception was that the predominant view at the time, which was white lawyers should be resorted to because they were technically proficient, already presented a barrier of access to for Black clients. And that barrier manifested itself in things like language, in things like tradition, in things like culture. And the establishment of a Black firm would be an instrument to break the barriers. Now, Oliver Tambo continued, and this is another observation made by Tambo about what it was like to practice in that period. And then he says, to reach our offices each morning, we had to move through a crowd of people in the hallways, on the stairs, and in our small waiting room. To reach our desks each morning, Nelson and I ran the gauntlet of patient queues of people overflowing from the chairs in the waiting room into the corridors. And where the clients came from Natal, they came from the Cape, they came from Free State, they came from Northern Transvaal. And of course, they came from Johannesburg. And they came to us because our firm was a place where they could find a sympathetic ear and a competent ally, a place where they could not be turned away or cheated, a place where they might actually feel proud to be represented by men of their own skin color. So we now encounter Mandela as a fully fledged attorney who understands that law could not entirely be separated from politics, but who also understands that to represent Black clients in an atmosphere of aggressive apartheid, the lawyer needed to show empathy, sometimes even sympathy. But the lawyer's role was to ensure justice. Ensuring justice, not just in a neutral world, but in a world in which white ascendancy and white Afrikaner power was at its strongest. Unfortunately, Tambo and Mandela, although it had a promising start as a law firm, it did not stay for long. Mandela believed increasingly that apartheid could not be fought by law alone. I must repeat this. Mandela believed that apartheid could not be fought by law alone. This, of course, did not mean that law had no role to play in the struggle against apartheid. But looking at law alone was never going to overthrow the system of apartheid. Mandela joined the underground movement. Later, decided to join actually to establish Umkhonto weSizwe. He became a fugitive from justice. He was a wanted man. The firm could no longer be sustained. Oliver Tambo was forced into exile. And 10 years after Tambo and Mandela were established, it closed down in 1962. Very few scraps of paper remain, which would give us a flavor of what it was like to be Mandela, the lawyer. Only a couple of memories, some of them from advocates at the time, like George Bezos, some of them from Mandela's own clients, some of them from written memoirs of Mandela himself and Oliver Tambo. So we can only imagine what Mandela thought at the time of the law firm. The rest of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and a bit of the late 80s were spent by Mandela the prisoner. In 1986, Mandela took up where he left with his LLB program, and he decided to complete it. And he would complete it only in 1988 at the University of South Africa. But upon his release, Mandela had been completely persuaded that not only was law important as an instrument of justice, but law was central to the attainment of justice. We see this in one of the very first programs of the ANC as a liberated organization in the 1991 Bill of Rights. The ANC produced a Bill of Rights document in 1991. The very purpose of the Bill of Rights document was to set out a vision of how South Africa would be governed under majority rule. Now remember, at the time, although now it looks a little bit unlikely, but at the time, the very concept of South Africa under majority rule was a highly contested one. The influences that informed those who opposed majority rule were the so-called fears of the Soviet Russia. But by 1989, the Soviet Union had virtually collapsed. And as Francis Fukuyama pointed out, history had ended. Whether or not that had any impact on the National Party.
You have 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes more.
Yes.
You mean you've given me an additional 5 minutes?
No, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. We don't know whether or not the collapse of the Soviet Russia had an impact in the way in which the National Party organized itself, but the situation rapidly moved towards a negotiated outcome. Right at the beginning, the ANC produced its Bill of Rights. Here is a crucial point about the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was a true ANC document, right? In the sense that the ANC was drawing upon its own history and commitment to the Bill of Rights. The ANC had produced a Bill of Rights already in 1923 under Pixlika Isaka Seme. It had reinforced its Bill of Rights in 1943. At the time, the president was not a legal person, it was a medical person, A.B. Uma. And that was called the African Claims, largely influenced by the developments in the Second World War. Mandela, in fact, writes about the importance of the African Claims in his own biography, that they perceived it as a revolutionary instrument. And of course, you can understand why they thought the Bill of Rights was a revolutionary instrument. If you spoke in 1955, as they did in the Freedom Charter, about equality, you would probably be lynched. And so the 1991 Bill of Rights, as a preparation for a negotiated settlement, was itself drawing upon the ANC's rich historical traditions and commitment to the Bill of Rights. One of the clauses contained in the 1991 Bill of Rights was a clause dealing with land. Now, a lot of people say the land clause was a 1996 compromise in the Constitution. What they don't appreciate is that the ANC's negotiating position, if you compare the 1991 clause on land versus the 1996 Constitution clause on land, they are virtually identical. There were two goals that the ANC wanted to achieve from its 1991 Bill of Rights on land as transformative instrument. The one was to ensure that there would be a massive land reform program. In other words, land would be transferred from the white oligarchic class that currently owns the land. At the time, it was owning 87%, to black masses that were landless, all the way traceable from conquest, but formalized in law after 1913. So the first goal in the ANC's own property clause was a land restitution program. But the second goal was not to burden the state with financing a land restitution program. And therefore, the goal was to ensure that the amount that is paid is not a market-related amount, but it is an amount lower than market-related amount. That became a contentious subject during the World Trade Center negotiations, during CODESA. But ultimately, the ANC got its way. It achieved its own strategic negotiation desired outcomes. It achieved the idea of inserting a land restitution program as a constitutional right. It's one of the things we often forget in South Africa, that one of Mandela's achievements was to insert the right to restitution of land in the Bill of Rights. Remember that the Bill of Rights until then in many other societies entrenched property as a fundamental right. But our Bill of Rights entrenches the right to restitution of land as a fundamental right, which is a right that belongs to the dispossessed and the marginalized. And the second goal that they had at the time of the negotiation was when restitution is undertaken, the current owners or occupiers of land would not be entitled to the so-called market-based compensation. Right? We are now dealing with Mandela, the president. We can see his transformation from lawyer to prisoner, back again to activist and negotiator, and now to president. We see one of the major achievements being the installation of the right of restitution in the Bill of Rights. One of the laws that Mandela champions, right, is in the employment sphere, the Employment Equity Act. Again, another major transformative piece of legislation that compels change in the workplace, starting with the civil service, but cascading across to the private sector. Remember this, not only was land the only asset taken away, human potential, Mandela repeatedly made this point, human potential was eroded under apartheid. But to rebuild human potential, Mandela thought a skills development program together with an employment equity program, which was made law and compulsory for application. Perhaps I should stop here, but we can go on with Mandela as champion. One aspect I was going to deal with is Mandela's commitment to the rule of law, which is manifested in a speech he gives in 1995 at the installation of the very first constitutional court. In that speech delivered on the 14th of February, 1995, Mandela does not look at courts only as a constraint to governmental power, but he looks at courts as...
I'm in a meeting.
Which one? This meeting or a different meeting?
Colleagues, please mute yourselves.
All right. So
Tembeka.
last point I want to make, Chair, with respect, is that Mandela's speech talking about the launch of the Constitutional Court is a very powerful speech, because in that speech, Mandela concedes political ground to the judiciary, and he subjects political authority, which he had no ground to subject, to the legal system in order to create a system of checks and balances. So 3 points to be made in this respect. Is that
Advocate, you're out of time already. I can't give you the three points.
Yeah, 3 points as a last, 3 points to be made.
Last sentence.
One is, last sentence. One is Mandela as committed to the rule of law as a way of governing society. But Mandela never committed to a colorless rule of law, but committed to a transformative rule of law. And the third point is Mandela's idea was not to tolerate racism. It was not to tolerate classism, but it was to uproot it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mukaitobi. I think that's been a very illuminating interpretation of the legacy of Madiba as a champion of law and justice. And I'm sure you could very well go on for another 20 minutes, and we would all really love to hear from you. But I will leave that for the round of questions at the end. Colleagues, I really need to ask you to please mute yourself. We're getting a lot of disturbance through while the speaker is presenting. You are also encouraged to switch off your video if you want, given the time that data is really the new fuel. So I would encourage you to switch off your video if you prefer, if you can, but please do mute yourself because it becomes very disturbing during the presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Larry Kaufman, and please forgive me if the bio I have here is not entirely correct. I was given this, and I stand to correction here. So Dr. Larry Kaufman is the current provincial priest for the Redemptorist province of South Africa, as well as being quite a noted doctor in moral theology. And author of a number of books. Sorry, may I ask the facilitators there to see if you can switch off? No, this is money.
Right.
Colleagues, please, can I ask you to mute?
I know, we don't talk. Don't give it again, my hand's wrist.
Dr. Kaufman, you're going to have to speak louder than that, above the noise, and we look forward to listening to the role of values in reconstructing the national ethos. I guess this brings quite home to us how we are working under COVID conditions, where we have our families with us, and often, the blur between work-life balance goes out the door. So let us engage with that, and thank you very much for being with us to present today. Over to you, Dr.
Yes,
Kaufman.
thank you. You're very, very welcome. Thank you. And truly, out of the mouths of babes, maybe the children can teach us a thing or two.
Yeah.
I was only approached for less than a week ago, but Ms. Mangaliso pointed out that my father was a lawyer who had prepared the ground for lawyers for human rights when he was afflicted by a stroke, and he was succeeded then by Brian Curran, who eventually did establish lawyers for human rights. So I grew up in a legal household and have the greatest respect for the role of law in shaping and holding society together. But I'm also conscious of the limitations of law in motivating or inspiring moral values. If anything, and here I probably betray what camp of jurisprudence I'm in, I hold that laws reflect the prevailing mores and values of a society. They don't create values. At best, they manage values. And the coronavirus pandemic provides an excellent case in point. We've invoked a state of disaster, and we've imposed laws appropriate to the 5 levels of lockdown. Yet everyone from the president on will say that we'll only succeed when individuals and their communities act responsibly and ethically. And so it's all about whether we're putting the other person first. I myself have just been through a bit of a COVID scare, and I realized that I had spent all my time focusing on protecting myself and not how I could be in danger of infecting others. And so it's just about that altruism that is a bit of an ideal. Now, I did experience that, ironically, in lock-up, not in lockdown, in lock-up in prison, in detention in 1986, where, ironically, we formed the most integrated community of detainees in Maritzburg, of 27 of us, of every race, of every religion and creed, of every age group, and of every background. And many of the people I was in detention with now have streets named after them: Dr. Chota Motala, Dr. A.S. Chetty, Peter Kirchhoff. And so there I experienced true altruism. It's extraordinary in that context. And this is perhaps where I am leaning in my reflection. I think here of a quote by Kitson and Campbell on law and ethics, where they say social ethics, social excellence is driven by a few key values. And those values give space to individuals to use their initiative in support of those values. And so I believe that ethics is consolidated by a commitment to maximum inclusivity, by a shared project for the whole population, and by drawing on all ethical traditions, as I experienced in prison: secularist moralities, new ethical traditions, world religions, and in South Africa we would add African and other traditional moralities. So if we respect and harness the core ethical values of the moral traditions of all our people, we may arrive at this shared principle. Moral goodness is at heart a free and informed commitment to active concern for inclusive well-being. Inclusive well-being, against selfishness, against exclusion, against harm. It's the art of living generously and truthfully, never harming others, but actively working towards the common good. Now, the common good is a principle that I will return to later because I think it's at the heart of social ethics. But let me propose what, after 20 years of work in ethics development, I now wonder if I've been pursuing an impossible dream. That core ethical principle of inclusive well-being is a free gift. A free gift. It cannot be bought, it cannot be bribed, and it cannot be legislated. And here consider the moral wisdom of the past, of Madiba, of Sisulu, as gift to us. Consider the balance between rights and duties as gift to us. Consider the Bill of Human Rights that the previous speaker referred to as gift. And I would say the values enshrined in the South African Constitution as a gift to us. The problem is to embrace and share the gift. Now, the preamble to our Constitution is unashamed in its affirmation of moral values: justice, honor, respect, unity and diversity, healing, and improvement of the quality of life. And the next following chapters, you'll find moral values peppered throughout all of these constitutional principles: human dignity, non-racialism, non-sexism, the rule of law, and so on. Ethics is about values, and for the social beings that we are, they're about shared values. What else is our Constitution but the gathering together of a vast array of ideals and values and hopes and dreams of all the people of this country? The history has yet to be written in an authoritative form of how all of that was garnered into the Constitution. And this touches on my advocacy of the common good. This is a broad umbrella term going back to the Greek philosopher Aristotle, representing the shared values and resources of political association. It's the sum total of the conditions of social living, where we human beings are enabled more fully and more readily to achieve our full potential. The ongoing challenge within South Africa is to respond to the diverse needs of all its people. It's related to the question of the common good. One of the problems is to find values held in common by conflicting parties. And here perhaps I would use the mimetic approach that perhaps the sharing of desires expressed in our Constitution are a valuable starting point. Shared desires. And if we are lucky, perhaps the experience of the coronavirus will point us again in that direction. It has relentlessly thrown itself at all of humankind. It has not discriminated between race, class, gender, or creed. Yet it has certainly in South Africa exposed the fault lines of massive economic and social injustice. It has exposed a broken and unfair healthcare system just a bit too soon for the reconstruction of that system. But it's also revealed incredible goodwill and extraordinary initiatives of people, many of them young people, And I'm aware of young people taking enormous risks for their fellow South Africans. And so maybe he has an opportunity to reignite the concept of the common good. During this virus, my personal slogan has been, an infection to one is an infection to all. I'm just sorry I didn't have access to the Minister of Health to share with him that motto. An infection to one is an infection to all. If I don't promote your health, then I risk my own. If I value my life, then I must save yours. So to conclude, I send a message to the universe, wherever my lawyer father may be. Yes, Dad, you promoted the law as a reflection of the values of a society. But sorry, old man, I think we've got a lot of work to do to improve and develop those values first. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dr. Larry Kaufman, and for giving us those extra minutes as well. You have at least a good 9 minutes to go there. So it will give us time to obviously reflect more deeply on your very important contribution about the role of values, about how we go about finding our moral compass again in South Africa. And I love the use of your words of altruism, the gifts of altruism, of common good, moral wisdom, rights and duties, and moral values. Those are the gifts that were given to us, and how do we begin to reimagine them in a new world and for humanity going forward. So thank you very, very much for those inspiring words. It gives me great pleasure to welcome a colleague and friend, Dr. Alex Asikatipi, who will be talking to us about the importance of culture, religion, and language as building blocks for the nation. Dr. Alex is the head of School of Social Sciences at, do I say this out in terms of the acronym, IMESA, that is, or IIEMSA, or formerly known as Monash, South Africa. He is also a specialist in cultural, medical, and social anthropology and sociology. He is a non-resident scholar at Duke University Center for Religions, Spirituality and Health, and that is in North Carolina. He's also an executive board member of the International Sociological Association Research Committee number 15. He has his current research interests include the interface of religion and spirituality, health and social outcomes, African health policy, African indigenous systems, as well as social agents and social processes. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Alex, and your time starts now.
Thank you very much, the chairperson, and thank you to the CRL Rights Commission for inviting me over to make this presentation. Very quickly, I'll be discussing on the importance of culture, religion, and language as building blocks for the nation. I will start very quickly by defining what culture, religion, and language are, and then begin to look at the various ways that we can mobilize culture, religion, and language for national growth and development. And then I'll give some recommendations. When we say culture, what exactly do we mean? In my opinion, this is one term that has been grossly misunderstood in Africa because we have constantly and consistently only referred to culture when we talk about our language, when we talk about our dress code, when we talk about our dancing. And so while all these are part of culture, culture goes far much more than that. Culture is a total way of life of a people. It has to do with both the material culture, which include those tangible things that we can touch, such as our houses, our cars, and so on. And then we also have the immaterial or intangible aspect of culture, which has to do with our ideas, our values, morals, and so on and so forth. So in that regard, therefore, religion and language are both subsets of culture, because religion and language are subsumed under that broad rubric of culture. But given their importance in human society, as well as in development, we may also regard them, that is religion and language, as independent of culture, because they both influence culture just as culture influences religion and language. So there's a mutual reinforcement between these three concepts. Religion is the expression of beliefs in the supernatural, and that belief creates a form of identity of those who share that common religious belief. While language may be defined as the arbitrary vocal symbol that humans use to facilitate their thought processes as well as their social interactions. These three concepts, culture, religion, and language, are so important in the development of the individual and, by extension, the society in which they function, that they cannot be separated. The last speaker just talked very eloquently about shared values. He talked about altruism and those things that give people that sense of well-being. And as he rightly noted, he said, laws cannot and do not create values. They can only manage values. And that is extremely important. And it is from there that I'm going to start my own presentation, because if we acknowledge, as rightly noted by Larry, that laws cannot create values, then the logical question is, what creates values? What are those things that sustain values? And how can values be defined collectively for collective growth and development? And that is where we come to the central question of, if South Africa has a national culture. In other climes, we know of societies, nations that have a dominant culture. So for example, we can talk of the Japanese culture of respect. So even in the classroom, in the corporate space, in the restaurant, there is that element of respect, not just because one holds a particular position, but because one belongs to that society of humanity. So that respect is pervasive and it permeates every aspect of the Japanese culture. We can also talk about the German culture. Amongst other things, one major thing the German society is known for is its discipline. The discipline that pervades every aspect of the German life, be it in the military, be it in government, be it in research. They are known for their discipline. And in Singapore, they have developed a culture of knowledge, of education, of schooling, that makes them to be well known and respected in the world. So within that framework, we ask the question, does South Africa have a national culture? Now, this must be separated from indigenous cultures, where there is no society that doesn't have a culture, because it is within the cultural framework that a society is sustained. But what type of national culture does the South African society portray as a nation? I have searched and I reflect on this as I conduct my research. There seems to be no one cohesive, positive cultural value that we can promote to say this is the South African culture. I dare to say, and sadly, that what seems to be evolving is nothing but a culture of violence. That seems to be one of the major things that South Africa is known for. Of course, it has its own historical antecedent. It has its own historical influence. But even today in the 21st century, we have this in so many ways. And we can give examples in modern times how violence seems to be the order of the day. So violence dictates in settling political scores, as we see repeatedly in KZN. Violence is used to achieve economic goals, as we see with various aspects of corruptions that are reported in the news. We also have, in the aspect of religion, sadly, the independent Pentecostal Holiness Church, how violence has been used to settle scores. So these various aspects demonstrate for me how violence is evolving to become a national culture. But as we know, this is destructive. And as a society, we must begin to be worried. What has bred this culture? How can we begin to stem it in developing to become the broad framework that defines the society? And thirdly, how can we replace that trend with a positive cultural value? And that is where I think religion, culture, and language come in. When I want to draw some differences between South African culture and by extension African culture and Western culture. While the African culture or the South African culture is more spiritual in nature, and I put that in inverted commas, the Western culture is materialistic in nature. Now, therefore, there is this dichotomy, but within this dichotomy, we also know that for the Western culture, there is a separation between spiritualism, or that which appeals to the supernatural, and materialism. Both don't go together. In the case of South Africa, there seems to be a fusion between religion, spirituality, as well as materialism and the attainment of wellness and peace. And if we begin to use that as a framework, we can now begin to understand why we are having the type of problems we have, especially with religious organizations in the society. Now, in this presentation, therefore, I look at what are the key issues that we have at stake. If we agree tentatively that the culture that is evolving in the society today is a culture of violence, we talk about even achieving social satisfaction. One of the end product of that is raping and the violence of partners. So these are pervasive, and we think that one of the major ways we can begin to look at this is to begin to deliberately create a system that will inculcate in citizens the values that we desire in the society. From a sociological perspective, the society is seen as a vehicle that can be directed towards achieving specific goals. And in this regard, and I agree completely with Larry, it is for us to begin to regenerate ourselves and begin to put institutions in place so that we can begin to have new values that will be beneficial to the individual and to the society. And so we may want to ask the question, how do we desire truth? What for us is truth? what for us is hard work. How do we achieve certain goals? What are the steps towards that? And if we ask those questions and then we collectively agree to what we desire, then we can begin to design specifically some form of interventions that will create some sense of collective values that we aspire to, and then we inculcate as a nation, so that we begin to see ourselves not as disparate ethnic groups or racial groups, but as a collective that we refer to as a nation. And that is where we can begin to talk about the development of the society. As it is, there seems to be so much fragmentalization with what we refer to as values. So with the Afrikaans have theirs, the Sutus have theirs, the vendors, they have theirs. But if we can, as Larry again said, if we can identify the positives of these cultures, then we create a national culture, then it will be a positive thing in the right direction. So what cultural values, therefore, are pervasive in South Africa that would lend strength to the process of development in the country? And I think there are some we can readily accept that these are positive values. For example, is the concept of Ubuntu. Even though we have so much overflogged this concept, I think it is central to building a national value culture. And we can use Nelson Mandela as a case study, because the very idea of forgiveness is embedded in African cultural values, that to err is divine, and to err is human, and to forgive is divine. So as both material man and as a spiritual man, what Mandela demonstrated to the society was that human beings err, but if we ascribe to a higher calling, we can demonstrate the characteristic of the supernatural and have that large heart to forgive. And in my opinion, there is a lot of tension that still needs to be addressed, and then there could be true forgiveness. And once we have that, we can begin to inculcate that in ourselves and in our children. So Ubuntu therefore becomes an important characteristic, but it is not only Ubuntu. African culture, and specifically South African culture, is expressive. It is cooperative. It is transformative. So it is not static. It is a culture that we can tap into, and because it is transformative, it is also accommodative. In the 21st century, with the interconnectedness of nationals, of citizens all over the world, we can borrow not only from within, but also from without, to create a society that is truly rainbow in characteristic. And this can therefore help us to build a society. Now, when we begin to harness these positives, what we then need to do is for government to design programs that are ethnocentric in nature, so that we become proud and take ownership of those values that define us as a nation. It is not to say that there are no negative cultural practices. We can identify those negative cultural practices that may hinder growth and development, and submerge them, eradicate them, and then use those ones that are positive towards the development of the society. But how do we do this? For me, it is by establishing structures and institutions. And for me, one of the basic ways of doing this is to establish a Department of Family and Social Relations. I have discussed this issue elsewhere before, but I think it needs to be emphasized that as a primary agent of socialization, the family as the fabric that holds a society together is gradually disintegrating in the South African society. And the Department of Family and Social Relations will be entrusted with that primary responsibility to rebuild the family as a social institution where values are inculcated in the young ones, and then they will grow up to become functional members of the society. A second point that will become so very important, therefore, is with the establishment of the Department of Family and Social Relations, there will also be an intersectoral coordination of social institutions, such as religious organizations that have played important roles in the society as a secondary agent of socialization, the schools, cultural groups, non-governmental organizations. All this will be cooperative to enrich our national values and, as a result, develop the society. A third point is the engagement with social influencers, including musicians, actors, authors, who will play a major role in positive social transformation. And once we begin to identify the interconnectedness of these social groups, these social organizations and individuals, everyone, because they are a part of this process, they will take ownership of the project and domesticate it so that it becomes long-lasting, rather than having to enforce. So if we take the case of the lockdown, for example, if people know that I am because you are, what affects you affects me, that will give me that sense of responsibility to respect the protocols that have been put in place to protect the citizenry. But if people see themselves as first and foremost purely individualistic, they don't see the connection between them and others and vice versa, it becomes difficult even when there are laws that dictate that this must be. And as Larry has noted, because this has not been ingrained in them, these laws have not been so effective as we have seen during this lockdown. So in conclusion, therefore, we say that, do we have cultural values that are pervasive in South Africa that will lend strength to the process of developing the country? The question is yes. How do we do it? We identify values that are positive in all the cultures. We integrate them in our languages. We domesticate them, we harness them in our languages, and as we begin to express them in various forms, through writings, through drama, through schools, we begin to inculcate gradually but surely these values in the lives of citizens. And then they become part and parcel of the lives of the citizens. And therefore we begin to create a national cultural value that will be used for development and transformation. And so we say, how do we go about it? We say the government will need to consider setting up a Department of Family and Social Affairs that will be primarily responsible in crafting these ideas so that it becomes a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellis Esekatipi. I think that was a very powerful build-up from Dr. Larry Kaufman's foundation of looking at the role of values. And you have now developed that further into looking at the nexus of culture, religion, and language in developing a national culture based on very inclusive values. And the point is, how do we then develop those inclusive values in our nation building process? So colleagues, our fourth speaker is running a bit behind time, and this is the problem when we all have, we at home and can do Zoom meetings, so they tend to overlap to some extent. Yes, he just joined.
Yes,
okay, great.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Should we just give him a few minutes? Or yeah? So our next speaker is Professor Tinieko Maluleke, who will be talking to us about social cohesion. And the question is social cohesion achievable in the context of racism, inequality, and economic justice? And I think the lineup for today actually is very well suited in terms of where Advocate Tembeka sets the legacy of Madiba as a champion of law and justice. And then Dr. Larry unpacks for us in terms of law and justice, the national ethos, and how do we go about reconstructing the roles of values in that, and very importantly drawn by Dr. Alex about the culture, religion, and language as building blocks for the nation as a whole. Professor Tinieko, let me just read out your bio there. So Professor Tinieko Maluleke is a senior research fellow and deputy director of the University of Pretoria's Center for the Advancement of Scholarship. He is a NRF B1 rated researcher and a member of the South African Academy of Sciences. And it is our great pleasure to have you here. Thank you. I know you're coming in from another meeting and having to switch mind frames to sort of just jump in at the so welcome and ready when you are. You tell me. So
yeah, thank you very much.
Are you okay to start? Good.
Yeah, I will start because I will not give I will not read thoroughly my paper as such. I'll just share a few ideas with the members. I was told that even if I speak for 5 to 10 minutes, that will be enough. That's the message that I got from the organizers by SMS. So,
Prof, you have about 20 minutes to talk, but you can take however much you feel comfortable with.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So, let me start by thanking the CRL for organizing this very, very important dialogue and consultation at this time. And I am very thankful that they have asked me to speak about social cohesion. Now, to begin with, I am not entirely comfortable with the notion of social cohesion. In fact, my sense is that this notion of social cohesion is not only deeply problematic, but may have been overtaken by events in more ways than one. So perhaps we should start by problematizing the very notion of social cohesion. Because this notion is premised, some of you may be aware of the book on social cohesion that was edited by Christopher Ballantyne, Michael Chapman, Kira Ewing, and Gerald Murray not so long ago. I happened to see that book because it was long listed in one or the other literary prizes in South Africa, and I'm involved in that world. And one of the very basic arguments in that book is to show how elusive social cohesion as a notion has been in the country. And the reason for this is that we have different understandings of what social cohesion is all about as a people. The second is that social cohesion has got many dimensions. Now, in terms of the topic that has been given to me, the suggestion seemed to be that economic inclusion is an important consideration for social cohesion, and that is a fact. Economic inclusion is very, very important for social cohesion. But it's not the only consideration for social cohesion to take place. So, for example, and I'll come to economic inclusion, and the very notion of inclusion is also problematic because you include those who are outside, but those who include, who are they and why are they already inside? And and so that too is something that we ought to problematize. Now, one level at which we should talk about social cohesion is at the level of identity, because unless we have a shared identity, we will not be able to speak coherently about social cohesion. And in South Africa, we still have that problem as to who we are. Are we Black? Are we African? Are we Black Africans? Are we all these groupings that we continue to call ourselves, so-called coloreds, Indians, and then if you move down to the so-called Black Africans, which is a very problematic term, then you have to talk about the 9 indigenous groups, and many will tell you even that number 9 of indigenous groups is artificial, because there are many others who remain excluded. So we can't talk about social cohesion without looking at that question of identity and who we are. And add to that a layer of discussion about citizenship. Who is a citizen and who is not a citizen? There was a time when all you needed to say was Black, and Black was very meaningful. I'm not so sure that we that Biko Black that we often talk about is still cohesive. So that is when you are going to include so-called coloreds, Indians, and Africans in there. And of course, with xenophobia, the Biko Black and the Biko African, if you like, is also disintegrating in front of us. Because now, among South Africans, you not only find Black and white and all these other categories, you also find the African foreign national. Now, what animal is that? The African foreign national. And the African foreign national is usually isolated from the others, the other foreign nationals who are in the country. They are in a special category of their own. Now, all these issues, including issues of gender, because social cohesion can't just be between the groups that I have mentioned now, it's also between men and women. In a country with such high levels of gender-based violence, social cohesion becomes a difficult proposition, because you can't have social cohesion in the context where women are being killed, women are being raped, to the extent that that is happening in the country. So that whole level of identity is one that we need to come to discuss, to have conversations about, if we're going to talk about social cohesion. Now, the other level, of course, is that is the economic one, which is what I have really been asked to come and speak about. Many of you will be aware of the pictures that Johnny Miller takes. He was based in Cape Town. He calls the set of pictures that he takes unequal spaces. And if you were to look at some, and he takes pictures not only in South Africa, he uses drones to take these high level pictures. And he takes them all over the world now, all over Africa. The pictures reveal nothing that is new, but as they say, a picture speaks much more than any number of words can do. So there is a picture that he has of Blowbos Rand and Kaya Sands in Johannesburg, side by side, just a street that separates them. The one side is a suburb, which is like first world suburb. The other side is a squatter camp where houses and people are really living on top of one another in the same vicinity, just across the road. You can throw a stone and it falls on the other side. And that is the absence of social cohesion for you, graphically displayed. He also have several pictures of Imzamoye too in Cape Town, contrasted to the suburb next to it, and the suburb in Stellenbosch, contrasted to the black area in Stellenbosch, contrasted with the suburb that is next to it. The golf park in Durban, which is situated next to Kennedy settlement, squatter camp. In fact, some of the golf balls fall onto the roofs of the squatter camps when the golfers are playing. And then you can see the same reality in Nairobi, where you go to Kibera, poverty as you have never seen in that squatter camp in Nairobi. Go to Egypt, a city of the dead, and a similar squatter camp in Kampala. And he shows how in our context, not just in our country, but in our continent, poverty and wealth live side by side in such a way that, in a sense, we should replace the word cohesion with coercion. So what you have is not social cohesion. What you have is social coercion, where people are being coerced to accept a reality that is in their face, day in and day out, a reality that says you are less than the people on the other side of the street, not just the people, not people who are too far away from you. You are less than them. You don't have water, just across the street there is water. You don't have food, just across the street there is food. Now, how on earth do we expect to have social cohesion as long as we have these situations which Johnny Miller paints so graphically for us? There are other ways in which we lack social cohesion, and I'm just touching on the big points that I have prepared here. If you look at the level of languages and the whole notion of diversity and how unsettling that notion is. So we are supposed to celebrate diversity. We are supposed to be a rainbow nation. At what stage do these enclaves that we wish to celebrate become prisons? At what stage is diversity a disadvantage and not an advantage? So is diversity to be celebrated in a manner that suggests that the blacks must remain black, the whites must remain white, the Indians must remain Indians, the poor must remain poor, the Zulu must remain Zulu, and so on. So this whole idea of diversity, which we wish to celebrate, is one that we ought to destabilize and disrupt and deconstruct in a way, if social cohesion is to happen. There's something that I'm passionate about, for example, which is the question of indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledges and also indigenous language. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I had someone shout.
I heard that too, yeah.
Yes. So, for example, how can we have social cohesion in a country that privileges certain types of knowledge above others, in a country that subjugates many different types of knowledges except in September, when we wake up to so-called heritage, and we dress up and we perform and we sing and we do something for a month and then it's gone. So social cohesion is not possible when we are not allowing who we really are to be part of our daily lives, to be in the school curriculum. And languages are another illustration of this. My prediction is that 50 years from now, maybe 50 is too many, there will be very few people who speak isiZulu, if the younger generation is anything to go by. There will be very few people who speak Sesotho and all the other languages. These languages are slowly dying in our midst, and we are killing those languages. And with those languages, we are killing the knowledges that they carry in them and the wisdoms that they carry. So think about COVID-19 and all the search, the frantic search for a vaccine. Who knows how much knowledge may be hidden among the KOI and the SAN knowledge systems, which we have decimated, which might be able to help us deal with this. Who knows how much knowledge is being decimated in the culture of the Swazi and the Zulu and the Tswana, which have become second-class cultures in this country. So for me, social cohesion becomes difficult in a country that does not appreciate all the knowledges that are available to it and tends to choose one or two only. English is really, and Mandarin, I believe, is something that is also coming and we've already adopted. I don't know that we will be able to build social cohesion simply because we wear the same clothes and speak the same language, when in fact we could be richer if we were able to make space for different realities. And finally, perhaps the final point that I would like to make in my input on social cohesion, if I can find the right section. I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and what COVID-19 does to expose. So COVID-19 is a virus that attacks the human immune system. And we have just discovered that we don't have the immunity as human beings to deal with it. But I think it has also exposed many other pandemics in the country. And I've already referred to some of them that we have. The pandemic of inequality, racism, sexism, all of these are now naked before us. We see them for what they are. Another very important thing about COVID-19 is that it attacks the respiratory system, our ability to breathe. Now, think about it this way. So social cohesion can't just be a matter between human beings, because breathing is something we share with plants. Breathing is something we share with animals. And link that to George Floyd. He couldn't breathe. That's how he died. And people who suffer from COVID-19 cannot breathe, and that's how they die. Now, there is a huge environmental crisis unfolding in front of us. And in fact, we may or may not know soon that even COVID-19 is a symptom of the warped relationships between human beings and the environment, between human beings and fellow animals on Earth. So we can no longer talk about, when we talk about health, we can no longer just talk about human health, because if humans can't be healthy if animals are not healthy. Humans and animals breathe and they pass germs across to one another. So this notion of social cohesion that is exclusive to human beings is one that we need to rethink and think of social cohesion beyond human beings, and not just between the poor and the rich, but also between humans and the lakes and the animals and the seas and the forests in which we live. So those are more or less the few ideas that I would like to share with you in the few minutes that you gave me. And thanks for your patience.
Professor Maluleke, I think we are very honored and privileged to listen to those very wise and insightful words. So thank you very much for rushing over to this particular meeting and actually addressing us. And you took the full 20 minutes, so thank you about that as well. So it wasn't just a few points, but a few very enlightening points that is very thought-provoking about a number of issues that we've raised. Colleagues, I'm now going to open up the floor, Obed, if we find, unless you're waiting for someone else. But we're going to open up the floor to discussions and questions in rounds of 3. So you can either post questions in the chat room here at the bottom. There's a menu. You can click on that and just put in your question. I will read it out. Or you can raise your hand. And if you go to the participants sort of tab or link, click on it at the bottom of it'll come up on your computer on the right hand side, and there's a function there to say raise hand, and if you raise it, I will allow you to speak and address the audience. Okay, so at the moment no one's raised their hand and we don't have any questions in the chat room. Does anyone want to say anything?
There is Nomalanga, his hand is up.
Namalanga, okay, I don't have that on mine. So have you got it? Oh, yeah. Okay, there we are. Namalanga?
Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Mine is about the very same law that we want to use in nation building. I'm not in support of that because I'm of the view that we are still using the Roman Dutch law, and yet we want to move into a position of, or in the spirit of Ubuntu. How can we do that? Because we need to first decolonize the very same law so that we can perhaps recreate what has been lost. I hear Professor Maluleke is talking about linguicides, the killing of indigenous people's languages. And I think he's also talking about epistemicides, which is the killing of indigenous people's knowledges. All that, how can it happen when we are still stuck in social cohesion or nation building, using the same system of the empire? If we want to see change and do things differently, we have to change the way we think. You still have the same people that put you in power that you are criticizing today. So there's a lot that needs to be changed. So that's my little input at the moment. I was struggling to write this whole thing here. Yeah.
Thanks, Namalanga. Let's just go to Emma as well. Emma, if you can unmute. It says Emma's Galaxy, so I'm not sure if that is the person.
Am I okay?
Yes, you can talk.
Okay, greeting to you all. I am having a concern. Yes, I'm just having a concern about
Emma, can you just either talk into the microphone or make it louder or something, or get closer to your microphone?
Am I audible enough?
Yes, that's fine.
Am I audible enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I have a concern here about this. I saw Dr. I think it's Dr. Alex, where he mentioned the fact on how can we replace this issue of violence in our nation, South Africa, with something positive. My concern here, I think we are missing something. When our government or our country introduce laws, new laws that are going to govern us, they forgot to prepare us. There is a lot of preparation that was supposed to happen. Now the problem is we are not prepared and things keeps on happening. Immorality is growing, and there are so many sectors that are dealing with handling the issue of immorality in our country, churches included, but we cannot find the solution to the matter. I was checking something here. I realized that many organizations are not proactive. They wait for a problem and there will be an organization that is formed to sort out that problem out. So what I've realized here, instead of our country to deal with these issues holistically, they are separating, like in the issue of GBV, whereby the victims have been taken care of and then the perpetrators are left out of the matter. And yet, if we are addressing social ills, if we want to address all these things, we need to address the family holistically, so that we even need to understand what is the cause or what is the root cause of the matter in everything that we are doing. So I'm trying to say, even some of the organizations that are dealing on daily basis with the matters or with society are left out when issues are dealt with, especially when I'm speaking on behalf of the churches, where we are represented, but we cannot see whether they recognize what the churches are doing to build the morale of our society.
Thank you very much, Emma. I don't see another hand and there isn't a question there. Okay, Katla, yeah, you can go. I think you need to unmute yourself. Just unmute your, yeah. Thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you so much again. I just wanted to put forth this statement that our parents still prefer mother tongue to be taught as a subject rather than used as language of instruction. And then I don't know how are we going to correct that, or yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to ask any of the presenters who wants to talk to please perhaps just unmute yourself or maybe just indicate to me. Alex, I think some of the questions were directed to you. So if the audience can perhaps also indicate to which speaker you would address your question to. I think some of them also asked Advocate Mbeke to answer one or two of the questions. Alex?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions that I think they are quite germane to this discussion. Nomalanga was talking about decolonizing the inherited laws that define litigation as well as the laws of South Africa. And I think that is very important because the process itself is a bit complex and it is detached from the common people. We understand that we have experts who understand and interpret the law, but at the same time, the people need to understand this process. And I think that is why the call that she made is so very important. There are other indigenous legal systems. How do we identify them? How do we fuse them into this process so that people will become part of it? There are so many cases where people have been disenchanted because they felt that they didn't have the resources. That is why they lost the case. That is why some people escaped some form of punishment for what they have done and so on. So I think I do agree with that idea of decolonizing our legal system, and then the way we think and the way we do things. And that is the point I was making, that it is not a short-term thing, it's a long-term process. The last speaker was talking about using the mother tongue as a way of instruction in schools. That has been said for more than 50 years now, from the time of Kwame Nkrumah to Anta Diop and so on. It's just that we have not been able to come up with that political will to do so. The English language is an arbitrary thing that combines different languages, Latin, Hebrew, French, and so on and so forth. So that can be done if we have the will. If we are going to have this as a project that in the next 30 years, we want to have a language that is truly indigenous and inclusive, we can invite the linguists, invite the anthropologists and so on, then they can come together and begin to build that database for that mother tongue that can be used nationally as a lingua franca. And the point that Emma made about replacing violence with something positive, and that is the crux of my presentation. And again, she noted it very well that we have this culture of violence, we have this culture of rape and so on. Now, the value of respect, the value of altruism cannot be instilled in people overnight. And I think someone had made that issue that the fabric of the society in itself is broken. But what is the foundation of the society? The foundation of the society is the family. And the recent survey that was conducted by ENCA actually noted that the family pattern, the family structure is broken significantly. And that is why I still think that there should be an urgent debate to establish the Department of Family and Social Relations. Because if the family system is broken, that primary agent of socialization cannot instill values. Children cannot grow up to become functional members because it is that foundation that other institutions will build on, such as religion, such as schools, such as the media, and so on. So if we have an idea what we want to do, we identify those values, then we begin to inculcate in the youngsters the value for a home, a relationship that is respectable, a relationship that will build, not that a relationship that will destroy. In our campus, for example, it is part of our talk. We share ideas, we bring students together so that they discuss their fears when there are issues that are discussed nationally. For example, the killing of those young ladies in Cape Town, in Gauteng, and so on. We also begin to engage them because it is part of our responsibility as higher institution centers to begin to mold them, to shape them. I've heard so many times where young ladies have said that they will not get married. They say they just want to have a child and that is it. Why? It's because of what they see in the society. How the society has become a space where they are no longer safe. But once we begin to assure them that there are so many things that can be done, how to handle relationship, and tell the boys how to appreciate women, then they will begin to have a second thought And when they have their own children, they can pass on those values. So it's a long-term thing, but individuals themselves cannot just do it. The government must take the initiative. And that is why I think the Department of Family and Social Relations is extremely crucial, because that department will be saddled with the primary responsibility of developing a new family structure where values and morals can be used as a means of building the society, starting from the family as the primary agent of socialization. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the detailed answer. Before I go to Advocate Tembeka, Advocate, I just want you to perhaps look at the group chat. There's some questions there that you need to answer. And then I want to ask Prof. Mosoma to probably just give a comment. He had raised his hand.
Thank you so much, Program Director. For the Tembeka Ngokaitobi, I just want to check what you decipher from Mandela's life history and commitment. Whether in it you don't see what I would want to call legal activism. Because it's not so much about practicing law, it's about living it. It's about making sure that law becomes an instrument of defense that society can use. Secondly, in your view, the cost of justice or access to justice in South Africa, does it justify the legacy of President Mandela in terms of his vision of society, where inclusivity and participation, at least at the lower level, was an important criteria? That's number one for him. Number two, it goes to the second speaker, Larry. I wanted to check, Larry. We have universities, we have schools, and the schools and universities are supposed to be the place where values are developed, imbued in young people. Have we missed the point since 1994 that we have created and produced in our institutions people who have understood only one way of solving problems, namely violence, conflict, feuds and things like that? And as a religious scholar, how do you account the fact that even the religion today uses violence as a means of solving problems? That, for me, it's a critical issue. We need to deal with these things, because why I'm raising this thing, it's one thing to extol virtues, values. It's another to come up with a constructive proposal. How do we make sure that we build a nation different from the one that we inherited in the past? I think this should be the focus of this conversation. We know what values are. We know what justice is. But knowing justice and living justice are two different things. We may have been taught, for example, about social cohesion, because it's one way of how people saw it. But if this is not working for us, what will work for us? Because we're at the crossroads today. What will work for South Africa? What is the vision of this nation? What should South Africa become? And that's, for me, a critical question to be asked. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Musoma. Advocate, before you respond, I just want to draw Prof. Maluleke to attention to a question in the chat line. Perhaps you can look at that. So after Advocate answers, I will then come back to Dr. Kaufman. You can then respond and then come to Prof. Maluleke at the end. Advocate Tembeka,
thank you.
There you are. Here we are.
Yes, thank you. I think what I will do, I'll probably answer three themes rather than trying to respond to individuals. I mean, there's a fascinating point made. I think it's Professor Musoma or Mr. Musoma, which is the question of what to do about Mandela's legacy. And he splits the question into two. So there's the legacy of Mandela, the legal activist, and then there is also the legacy of Mandela, the president. In other words, the constitutional legacies. I mean, both of those are highly contested legacies of Mandela. Let me start with legal activism. So Mandela begins his legal training, like many of us do, you know, drawn into the profession by various interests, and not at the stage he began law, not yet clear whether or not he wanted to use law as an instrument of justice, but attracted to it by various other trappings. It is only when he is inside the legal system that it becomes almost inevitable that if you want to practice law as a black man in the 1950s, it is almost inevitable that you will be involved in some political activity or the other. And this is a kind of conversation that is ongoing between him and Oliver Tambo about what, in fact, will they do with their training as lawyers? How are they going to use the law firm? And the law firm is converted not as a result of a deliberate design, but the law firm is ultimately converted by a push from below. It's the reality, as Oliver Tambo pointed out in his biography. Being black essentially was a criminal act in South Africa in the 1950s. It's the state of blackness was a state of criminality, because the apartheid laws stretched from birth to death. You were always a crime, one way or the other. If you were born in the wrong place, that was a crime. If you happened to step on the wrong street, that was a crime. If you happened to go into the wrong toilet, that was a crime. A wrong school, a crime. A wrong university, a crime. So that entire livelihood, if you were a criminal lawyer in the 1950s, it was almost inevitable that you will be involved in politics, because the state of blackness was a state of criminality, and that is Oliver Tambo's observation. So the activism is almost imposed on Mandela. It is an activism that he cannot run away from. It is inside the law firm, and it is also at home. But Mandela is not a narrow legal activist. I am a narrow legal activist because I'm a legal activist, but I am not involved in politics as such. I'm in politics with a big P. Mandela is also not a narrow activist. At a certain point in time, he comes to the recognition that law on its own will not bring liberation. It will not dismantle apartheid. Apartheid requires a different approach, a different strategy. It requires him to remove the velvet glove so that we can all see the iron fist. That is not to abandon the law for Mandela, but it is to use the law in a complementary way. Because when arrested, remember the strategy that Sobukwe used, that they will not be asking for bail. But when Mandela is arrested, he knows that in order to soften the effect of a punishment, he needs to assemble a team of lawyers. So even though he has decided that he will engage in armed struggle, even that armed struggle itself is restricted in relation to its targets. It's not the kind of an armed struggle that will be destroying everything and anything in its wake, but it will be a targeted armed struggle in order to protect deaths against civilians. And even when the MK is operating outside in the 60s and in the 70s, one of the big topics in MK is how to sustain the Bill of Rights in a military context. And that's when Oliver Tambo says, well, in the 70s, that we must also apply the Geneva Convention in relation to prisoners of war. So at no point does Mandela abandon the belief in the essence of the rule of law and the belief in the essence of the Bill of Rights, even after he has decided that I am now removing the velvet glove. So I see Mandela as a much more, in a much more expansive understanding of in the 60s, I mean, when it was really, really hard, that he was always struggling with balancing the fight against apartheid in its raw form, as well as ensuring that there is some sort of a semblance of law. And this is probably why he did not find a difficulty transitioning from sort of guerrilla warfare into the negotiated space. So that's what I would say about the sort of legal activism of Mandela. I mean, if he is the prime example of a legal activist. So there is a bigger contest in relation to Mandela's constitutional legacies, because a lot of us look at those agreements of the transition with some skepticism. We think that different choices should have been made at the transition. But often it is unclear to me if we were exposed to the same choices that Mandela was exposed to in the transition, if we would have made different choices. And it is also unclear to me if the choices are as constraining as we make them to be. I usually make the example of land and the fact that the ultimate legacy in relation to the property clause was the power of expropriation, which is guaranteed in the Constitution, despite the resistance of the National Party. And I look at 25 years of freedom, where the power has never been used at all. And I look at the fact that shortly after Mandela had struck the deal, if it was a deal, that there would be a power of expropriation. In fact, the government struck an economic deal, which was based on willing seller, willing buyer, which was totally diametrically opposed to the constitutional deal. So something else happened between the legal and the economics. It seems that on the legal side, a radical solution was found, but on the economic side, a neoliberal solution was found. So something else was happening at the same time as Mandela was negotiating the constitution at the World Trade Center, because the expansive transformative vision of the constitution is not transferred into the economic sphere. So that is where I think the constraint really has been. I mean, I agree with Nomalanga's point about promoting indigenous law. I mean, that again is a puzzling dynamic of the transition. We have a constitution in 3 provisions, 3 different sections, 31, 36, 214, which specifically says that the new society will promote, recognize indigenous law. But we have a legal system that has continuously been dominated by Roman Dutch legal system, which again, Mandela knew that he had to dismantle the Roman Dutch legal system, and it was agreed at the World Trade Center negotiations that the system would be dismantled, and if it continues to operate, it would operate on the same or similar level as indigenous law. But since then, we've just abandoned our focus on building of indigenous legal systems. Just the last point I want to make, just my own contribution to the topic about where it is right now, a general discussion about where it is right now. I mean, I agree with Professor Maluleke. I do not see this social cohesion coming as it would in the context of economic marginalization. I do not see that there is any prospect that there will be a single society. I do not see that there is a possibility of Ubuntu in the context of economic marginalization. I think we have to go back to the transitional period and fix the problem of economic marginalization. And the point is not about inclusion. The point is about the dismantling of structures that perpetuate exclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate. Dr. Kaufman, do you want to come in? And then I will open it up again.
Yeah, thank you. But I, I would like to pick up quickly on Tembeka, because I think it's important to have continuity of discourse, of a flow of ideas before I come to the questions from Masoma. But I want to refer to the experience of Rwanda, because there we had a situation of genocide and tribal conflict and all the rest. And I got to know very well a person who worked on the International Criminal Tribunal, Dr. Nicola Palmer at the University College London. And she worked on that tribunal, has published a book since, but the title is very revealing. It's called Courts in Conflict. I don't know if Tembeka knows this book, but it's a play on words, because first of all, the word conflict referred to the conflict situation of Rwanda, and therefore legal systems and courts meeting in a political conflict context. But the other meaning of the title is courts in conflict with each other. And what she showed was the conflict there over the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was the conflict between international law, then the national law of Rwanda, and then traditional or tribal law or cultural laws. And so that's probably the site of struggle that we have to face in this discourse, because it's all very well dismantling Roman Dutch law, but we are still part of an international community. So we still have to find ways to speak the language of international law. We still have to find ways to develop our own national legal system. But that's in turn going to have to draw on the cultural and traditional values that haven't yet been tapped in our jurisprudence. Now, that's my point about where I can come in with Mosoma. Where do we tap? How do we tap? How do we somehow harness the value system? He spoke eloquently of the importance of the schools and of tertiary education. But I agree with Alex, it has to start in the family. When I spent a lot of effort, exhausting effort, developing ethics workshops for various groups around the country, at the end of it all, I began to question its value, its effectiveness, because, and I've published an article, can ethics be taught? Can you even begin, even at school level and at university level, when your foundation is completely lacking? So that for me is a problem, and I don't have the answer, I'll be honest. I also agree with him that religion, while it has the potential for playing a positive and constructive role, has been severely abused throughout human history. And the only point there I would want to make is that I don't think you can simply label religion as being responsible for violence. It's human beings and their dysfunctional sense of belonging to a religion, leading to a form of fundamentalism that is the real culprit. And I see many examples, even from my own church tradition, of Pope Francis taking a strong view against any form of violent expression or upholding of religion. And we're almost seeing a shift under his leadership towards non-violence, almost a pacifism in our new theology. So it's an open discussion, and I don't think we have the time now this afternoon to go into it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. I know there's someone, Mr. Mokatile, who has a question, but I think let's just go to Prof. Maluleke to respond to the question in the chat. Prof, have you read the question? Are you okay with it?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
It's a question about social compact and social cohesion.
Yes.
Whether the one is not the other side of the coin, and whether we can achieve social cohesion without social compact. The problem with the notion of social compact is that it's an old notion. I mean, and this is where the poverty of conceptualization is great, because we now have to rely on Hobbes and others, Locke and those people who thought up this idea of social compact in the early 1900s and so on. And of course, social compacts in the Nordic countries have proven to be workable for some time. my only reservation about it is that this notion can be bastardized, it can be reduced to the bare essentials. So what is social compact? It's NEDLAC. So it's just the meeting of those entities in society that are supposed to represent the rest of us. But social compact has to be imagined as a vision for a different type of society. And it is that vision that I find lacking often when we discuss social compact. My sense is that social compact is some kind of arrangement that will make sure that people are included to the extent that they can be included in the economy of the country. And so it's not a radical vision for an equal society. Our social compacts tend to think we will just take electricity to the squatter camp. The idea is not to change the squatter camp into a suburb and to become more and more equality between the suburbs and the squatter camps. So it's a good idea. I mean, I can't dismiss the importance of social compact at all. I just think we need to have a more radical imagination of it than I've seen operating.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Prof. Where am I? Mr. Mokatile, I think, yes, you wanted to ask a question, and then Rainier also wants to ask a question after that. The floor is yours. Mr. Joe Mokatile. I think you need to unmute yourself. Just unmute your screen. There we are.
Yeah. So what I was saying I would likely like to apologize for giving.
I think just talk more into your microphone so we can hear you. Just go closer to the screen. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah, I was saying I want to apologize for coming in late due to some technical challenges. I believe I have lost a lot that was said here, but now I pick up here and there. But now my point is, are you with me?
We can't hear you too well. I think just talk more into the microphone or closer to your computer. Yeah.
Yes. I've already apologized for coming in so late.
Sure. Thanks.
Yes. And then I believe I have lost a lot that has been discussed here. I just picked up here and there due to some other questions and the answering of some panel. So I should believe that we should try to put education into what the law says and what other issues related to the community. Because I, for one, I should believe that now a lot of people are still believing that now what they have grown up with, it is of more importance to their understanding rather than what the law is saying, because they haven't got much education into what the law stands for. So I should believe that more education to the communities, more education to what the law say, and then what should the practices be also taken into consideration will match with each other in a way that now no one will be hurt. So I should believe it is the responsibility of those people who are in a position to give education, to show that now people understand exactly what the law say, and then again, what are other issues related to the human, cycles, whereby people will believe that now what they have been grown up being taught about is more important than maybe respecting the law, which they don't even understand themselves, or sometimes finding that now the law is actually sometimes overriding to what they have grown up with. Let me just follow the meeting, then I'll come up again later.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mokatele. I have two people. So I have Father Makacho wants to say something, and I have, prior to that, it was Rainier. Rainier, do you please unmute yourself? Sorry if I mispronounced your surname. Name. Rainier, we're waiting for you.
Commissioner Skuman.
Sorry, Obed. Yeah, Rainier Skuman. Yeah, there we are. You're unmuted, right?
Okay, thank you very much. I just actually wanted to make 2 points, because I came into this conversation this afternoon not really knowing what to expect, and I have found it so stimulating, because there have been really some blindside perspectives that I could not have anticipated, and that I found very thought-provoking. So I just have the view that what has happened this afternoon will really be a good scene setter and for a further deep conversation about the issue of social cohesion. And social cohesion is a very important thing for us in the Commission. It's one of our flagpoles, and we really need to give it even more thought than we have in the past. But the second thing is, Professor Masomo, our chairman, said knowing justice and living justice are two different things. And then he also asked the question, what is our vision for South Africa? And I think that is such an important question, because an absence of a vision creates a vacuum, and a vacuum is an empty space which can be filled by any kind of thing and any kind of garbage. And we mustn't do that to ourselves. So I think it's been very useful in sense of filling that vacuum and giving us food for thought. And now, but the work must really start. It is really time for us to focus and to put our heads down on this issue of social cohesion. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Rainier. I think from my side, I just want to quickly put a small point in there about how Prof. Maluleke said social cohesion is social coercion, and I don't think anyone's picked up on that particular point. But Father Makwacha.
Yeah, that's a bit of an overstatement.
Father Makwacha.
That's a bit drastic.
Thanks. I'm going to give the floor to you. Father, are you unmuted? Where are you? I can't see you on the screen.
Me.
Father Makwacha, Mangaliso Makachwa. Yeah.
Yes. I think we lost him for a moment. He's coming back.
Okay. Okay.
Well, can I just respond? I mean, I don't think.
Oh yes, sorry, Prof. Yeah.
I don't think it's an overstatement, because social cohesion becomes social coercion when those with power dictate what social cohesion is and intend to include those without power in ways that they alone define. So social cohesion feels like force to those who are being told you have to be like this, you know. So I don't think it's such an overstatement at all. I think it is possible to experience social cohesion as coercion. And that's why it's important that we open up discussion and not merely take this notion for granted and assume that it has meaning or the same meaning for everyone.
Very interesting, Prof. It's almost the antithesis of social cohesion. But let me give a chance to Father Makacho. I think he's battling to connect there. He is online. Well, he is here, but he's just connecting to audio. I don't have any other more questions or even in the chat. So after that, Obed, should we go to the closing remarks? I need to be guided by you? Okay.
Yes, after that we can go to the closing remarks, but we seem to have lost Prof. Masoma as well.
Okay. Oh, goodness. There we are.
I am here.
Are you
Oh,
here?
okay.
Good,
Okay.
good,
Okay.
good. There's Prof. Musoma and Father Makacho is also here, I think. Is that right? Father, we're waiting. I mean, are you unmuted? You have the floor.
I don't see him.
Okay, so I think he's
Nayo,
gone.
sorry, Prof. Nayo,
Yes.
can you check if Father is somewhere in the lobby or something? I can't find him on the other.
Nayo says Father Makacho is reconnecting to the meeting. So that was at 4:20. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anyone that would like to give a comment while we're waiting for Father to connect?
Or perhaps, Prof, we can give Prof Musoma just to be doing something, and as soon as Father joins, he can just throw in that point in.
Sure. Prof Musoma, would you like to perhaps share a few thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Program Director. First and foremost, let me acknowledge you as a Program Director for directing us so well.
Thank you.
And allowing everybody to make inputs. And second, to thank our speakers. First, Advocate Tembeka Ngagaitobi, Dr. Larry Kaufman, Dr. Alex, Professor Maluleka, and our participants who have been listening, and some of them, I think, wherever they are thinking about these issues. Our speakers have been very candid and frank. They've raised issues that would otherwise not be raised, and they've shared with MRM and CRL, because we are Chapter 9 institutions. We are supposed to be the institutions that are championing some of the key elements that have been raised today. And they have actually enriched our thinking in many ways. And we will take with us some of their proposals, constructive proposals for the work we do as CRL. And I wanted just to say this without any much emphasis to one speaker against the other. You know, the issue of activism, which we must draw from Mandela, it must keep all of us thinking that talking on its own will not change anything. That we need to accompany our words with our action. And I draw this from President Mandela when he saw that law on its own would not change, would not destroy apartheid. And so this activism is what we must use to galvanize and mobilize society for transformation. I also want to challenge our speakers. They are good academics. How much are their thinking available for society? How much time do they have to interact with society? These very lofty ideas, often they get said by people, but they never hear their own intellectual thinkers raise these issues. When we look at the issue of the structures, that the destruction of structures that perpetuate exclusion and economic marginalization, how can we achieve this? Because for 26 years, I think we've been singing about this. And you might have seen during COVID-19, how people queued for help, for food and things like that. It means it's deepening. When we look at what Larry said, the place of morality, the place of common good, how do we build structures that are embedded, that continue actually to make available what it means to create common good, to protect the other as a way of protecting oneself. And I think these are the issues that we have. To define ethics in its quite located definition, it's one thing. I was looking at myself, I said, you know, does it mean to do good, one needs God? Do we need God to do good? I ask this question from time to time. And it's a question that the religious people must ask. Because if we are not able to understand the place of spirituality in transforming society, then there's a mismatch. The issues that Professor Alex raised about
Oh, I hope we haven't lost Professor Musoma. Obed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, the prevalence of violence and other things have eclipsed what actually defines the culture of South Africa. And of course, the proposal from Dr. Alex is very important. And I don't think that even the establishment of that Department of Family Life and Relations would solve it. Because there are many departments who have already identified to deal with issues, but their impact is very marginal. What kind of department what kind of human beings should be responsible for this? We have got many organizations in the country, but their effectiveness is working across purposes. We are not able to work together. We work in silos, so that our impact is very marginal. Hence, our coming together, CRL and MRM. It's one way of demonstrating, listen, let's work together and create an impact which is desired to transform society. I agree with Prof. Maluleke. Social cohesion. It's something we cannot achieve. We can sing it, but we can't achieve it. Because what happens on the ground every day militates against it. Because if we define social cohesion in terms of two people drinking tea from across ethnic groups, well, that's possible. But social cohesion as a national achievement, a national emblem, that we can't. Yes, it's impossible. It's possible to see that the social cohesion has been used as a bandage against a festering wound of pain, exclusion, and we need to make sure we deal with the wound, not with the bandage. And this is the challenge we have. And the frankness of this discussion, we must take it to society, to the nation. And MRM and ourselves must come together and say how best we must take this discussion to the nation. The pain is deeper out there. We can talk in our virtual, conversation, but the pain is deep. We must take these ideas to our people, making sure that they are custodians of their own destiny and their own history. So for me, it's very, very, very important that we look at all of this. And I want to thank you, our speakers, quite profusely for doing justice to your presentation, and more importantly, for igniting and raising our consciousness about the challenges we face as a nation and the challenges we face as a people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Musoma, for those very enlightening, inspiring, and also thought-provoking words, and a great summation of the presentations that have taken place today. I agree with you that they are very thought-provoking and will raise, and the candidness, I appreciated that word, how candid all the presenters were about our path forward. So thank you very, very much. And thank you for also the privilege of actually being asked to host this event. I thank you. Thank you for that, Obed. And please convey my thanks to Prof. Musoma and Prof. Makwachwa, Dr. Makwachwa as well. Father Makwachwa, yeah. Thank you, colleagues and everyone. I hope you had a fantastic afternoon, inspired afternoon listening to that conversations. Let us take it back into our communities and in our own thought processes further.